All right. Morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining from today. We've got ample time zone representation on this call. Thanks for joining today's session that is in partnership with Cloud Security Alliance, Fugue, Recorded Future, a whole bunch of great folks on the line to be talking about some very interesting topics. Before we get to all of that interesting stuff, I have just a few boring housekeeping items to get out of the way. If this is your first time using GoToWebinar, you'll see a little control panel on your screen. Included in that control panel is a Q&A module for questions. At any point during the presentation, feel free to submit any questions for either of our presenters, Curtis or Charity. They'll get to all questions submitted, or as many as we have time for, at the end of their respective presentations, but feel free to submit them throughout the presentations. Today's session is being recorded. So don't worry about that. We'll follow up with the recording to all registrants, whether you made it or not today. And with those few housekeeping items out of the way, I'm going to kick this over to Carrie Mannister from the Cloud Security Alliance Minnesota chapter to introduce our first speaker.
Hello, everyone. Ben, you can hear me?
Yes, coming through loud and clear.
Okay, cool. All right, awesome. All right, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really greatly appreciate and respect your time. Just a couple things from the Cloud Security Alliance Minnesota. The board, we just met recently and we really want to get more connected with you and your needs. And so if you would like to share your successes, what's working for you, what's not working for you in security. We would love to hear from you, and if you could email us at info@csamn.org, we would really much appreciate it. The other things too is that CSA has so much to offer, and one thing that the board and I identified is that there's just so much information, and then in the coming months we're going to try to curate that information and slowly feed it out to you. And again, your feedback is much appreciated. The other thing, in early next September, or this September, we're going to try to have an actual in-person meeting. And then finally, the biggest thing that we're here for, the CSAMN.org, is that there is such a huge need for security professionals. And the board and I, we feel so strongly about curating and evolving the new security professionals for the next generation. And we are looking for a board member to assist us with this mission and this vision. And so if you're interested in being part of the Cloud Security Alliance of Minnesota, please send an email to info@csamn.org. And we'd love to hear from you and love for you to join us. The other thing too is, again, Recorded Future, thank you so much. Sean O'Brien, you are absolutely awesome for making this happen. Thank you. Fugue, Sylvia, it's been a great pleasure of getting to know you and meeting you this year, so thank you so much. And what we'd like to do next is like to introduce Fugue. Fugue is also, for everyone out there, is offering a $25 Amazon card giveaway, and Ben will be posting the link to the URL for that giveaway into the chat. So right now we'd like to get into Fugue's presentation. I'd like to introduce Curtis Mizai, and Curtis is Vice President of Engineering at Fugue, and he's also a former CTO. And I'd like to get into more personal about Curtis. He has, one of his biggest interests is working with his two boys and working with them on various kid-sized engineering projects. And I'd love him to start off to say what types of kid-sized engineering projects, and then get on with his presentation. So again, everyone, thank you so much. Thank you for attending. And Curtis, it is all now yours.
Yep, thanks, Carrie. Yeah, I'm actually joining from the beach right now. So I've got a 4- and a 6-year-old, and so this week has been full of sandcastles and the like. So that's been a good one. But then I guess back at home right now, they're very interested in anything that goes fast. The faster, the better. So they've been reading up on like land speed records and the like. And so I think the Bloodhound SSC maybe holds the land speed record for fastest land vehicle. And so they've tasked me with building that or recreating it or something along those lines. And I haven't totally figured out what we're going to do on that front, but that's their mission for me. And let's jump right in. So, oops. All right, you all should have my screen now. Let me know if that's not the case. I think that is. All right. And yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you, Carrie, for the introduction. And let's get into this. So, yep, again, I'm Curtis Misey, VP of Engineering with Fugue. Our focus is cloud security and fixing misconfigurations in cloud infrastructure. And for my brief segment today, we're going to talk about thinking like a hacker to avoid cloud exploits. So, real quick overview of the agenda. Why should we think like a hacker? What are the advantages of doing that? We're going to look at one cloud breach in particular and see what we can learn from it. And then talk a little bit more about cloud misconfigurations and their vulnerabilities. And as was mentioned before, we've got this $25 gift card giveaway. So the link to that is in the chat. All right. So why should we think like a hacker, and what are the advantages there? You're probably familiar with pen testing, where we ask a team to probe our applications and our infrastructure for vulnerabilities. These folks, and especially the most skilled ones, are really paid to think like hackers. But thinking like a hacker is not just for them. I want to highlight that this is useful for the rest of your team, whether they're security engineers or infrastructure developers and so on. And there's a general problem solving technique called inverting the problem. And thinking like a hacker is really a form of inverting the problem when it comes to cloud security. So we're not just going to think through how to secure our infrastructure. We also want to invert that and think about how we can break it. And so the reason this is useful is we're wanting to challenge the assumptions we might have about our security posture and look for ways that we can either work around that or find some vulnerability that just may not have been apparent on the surface. So this is really important in terms of taking an objective look at your infrastructure and leveraging your creativity to see if you're really secure as you think you are. Charlie Munger is one proponent of this inverting the problem solving technique. He's Warren Buffett's right-hand man and has been for many years. And so he's got a number of good quotes about inverting the problem. One related one is, all I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I'll never go there. So to me, this is relevant in that, like, we want to know all the ways and areas we can go wrong with cloud security so we can make sure we never go there and we can fix them in advance. This is one of Charlie Munger's longer quotes on the subject about inverting the problem, and he refers to it as thinking backwards here. So he talks about it in terms of it forces objectivity. So we have certain assumptions about our security, whether it's network security or security of our credentials, and we want to look for ways to find gaps, challenge our assumptions, and by trying to disprove our security, we can actually identify and fix problems, which is really important. So one specific cloud breach, which we'll talk briefly about, in 2016, Uber's AWS account was hacked, and that resulted in 50+ million users PII being exposed. And so the rough sequence for that went like this. Hackers gained access to one of Uber's private GitHub repositories. In there, they found AWS access keys committed in the source code. They identified that those keys were still active. They had permissions for the AWS S3 service. They were able to list the buckets, find objects in that S3 bucket, and then copy data out. So in many ways, this is a really straightforward hack and pretty simple, but we can actually learn a few important things from it. So like if we think about this from like a hacker's point of view and think about what we can learn from this. So when it comes to say your own credential management in terms of secrets, passwords, and so on, you might have certain assumptions about how secure you are. Well, if we challenge those and think about, well, what other ways as a hacker could I gain access to credentials or passwords for critical services in your infrastructure? And you may be able to think of a couple ways that weren't immediately obvious. You know, the hackers here found credentials actually committed in a GitHub repo, which is a big mistake, but it can happen. Another way that could come to mind, for example, is if somebody mistakenly or without thinking shared credentials over Slack or in whatever chat system your team uses. And so if a hacker could gain access to Slack, they could then potentially have credentials that could, you know, cause a lot of damage or leak a lot of information. This also brings up other topics like, you know, MFA on your accounts and the dangers of having list permissions in cloud accounts. Because if you have list permissions, you can discover resources. And we could go much deeper on all that, but we can do that on another day. So a little bit more about cloud misconfigurations and vulnerabilities. You know, there's an ever increasing amount of resources in the cloud, obviously. Teams have maybe tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of resources in the cloud. And by resources, I mean networks, servers, databases, and so on. And with that many resources, it's almost guaranteed that you'll have misconfigurations. And we know hackers automate discovery and exploiting those misconfigurations. And so similarly, we need to automate discovery of those misconfigurations and fixing of them or remediation. And in terms of, you know, what surfaces does a hacker have access to? You know, the traditional ones being access via networks, via say open ports, application vulnerabilities. The newer one, which is more and more relevant in the cloud, is identity and access management, or IAM. And at Fugue, we refer to IAM as the new network, in that you can actually move around via credentials and things like assume role capabilities in AWS to, you know, become different roles, become different users, and even move between accounts. And so the little diagram on the right there shows how, you know, a hacker, for example, can move between 3 different AWS accounts by using AWS assume role capability. And there are various ways to make this secure. So it's definitely not a fundamentally insecure feature. However, if you have it misconfigured and get it wrong, then a hacker can basically pivot or move through this IAM network to find a role or a user with elevated permissions and then cause a lot of damage. So when you're thinking like a hacker and taking a look at your cloud infrastructure or your cloud applications, you need to consider both like network and IAM connectivity and see how a hacker might be able to, you know, gain entry to your infrastructure and then move around or access different resources. And so having a visual map of your infrastructure could be, you know, a helpful tool to have with this, and this is something Fugue can help you with. So, you know, it's important to see the connectivity both in terms of network connectivity and what has access to what in terms of IAM permissions. And that actually is the end of my short segment today. So we've got a few minutes for Q&A on this front. So feel free to paste any questions in the chat and I will get to it. In the meantime, I'll just mention that you can visit Fugue's website at fugue.co to see what we're all about. And again, you can visit the link to enter to win the $25 gift cards, which we have available. So I will pause here for a minute. one question that came in. Are there similarities with AWS, Azure, and Google in terms of IAM permissions and IAM as a network? Yep, that's a good question, and there are similarities, but big differences as well. So the example I gave was using assume role as part of AWS, and I'm fairly familiar with that. With Azure and Google, I think there are different mechanisms. Google has service principals, for example, and I believe with service principals, one service principal can trust another one. So that would be a very similar case, I believe. On Azure, I believe it's Azure applications, and I'm less familiar with those, actually. Cool. And I see they dropped in a link to our, Fugue just did a survey of the state of cloud security. And so we have a report available for that as well, which is available in the chat. All right. With that, I think I will hand it back to you all at CSA and over to Charity.
All right, thank you, Curtis. With that, Charity just gave you presenter capabilities, so feel free to take it away on your presentation. And as a reminder to everybody else on the line, any questions you have during the presentation, as this one will be a little bit longer, feel free to submit them whenever, and we'll get to them all at the end. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Give me just a second and I'll get my screen up here. All right, let's see if this works. Can you see my slides?
I can see your desktop, Charity, but I can't currently see the slides.
Okay, let's try that again. Sorry guys, give me just a second. Can you see a dark web demystified front slide deck?
Yep, looking perfect.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for your patience while we got the slides up there. Today, we're going to be doing a really fun presentation, busting myths about the dark web. So hopefully when you leave here, you'll be more informed about the criminal underground internet, how threat actors utilize it for business, and how you and your team can use this valuable security intelligence to defend your organization. First, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Charity Wright. I'm currently a threat intelligence analyst at Insect Group, which is a part of Recorded Future, and I'm based out of Dallas, Texas. So before this, I served in the United States Army for 10 years. I served at the National Security Agency as a Chinese linguist and intelligence analyst. When I transitioned to the private sector and jumped into cyber threat intelligence, I worked for a variety of companies. I worked for a secure cloud hosting company called Armor Defense. I also worked at Hilton Worldwide, Ernst & Young, and now that I'm on the other side working for an intelligence vendor, I specialize in the criminal underground, anything related to China, and also influence operations, or as most people know it, disinformation. Let's jump into the dark web. What is the dark web? Is it dark? And what makes it dark? Also, who made this graphic? It wasn't me, but it's useful. While the dark web is well known of, fewer than 1% of internet users have actually visited the dark web. And even among IT security pros like us, only 1 in 7 have ever ventured to a dark web forum or site. This lack of direct experience helps explain why there's so much fear and misinformation being spread about the criminal underground and this space. But it also suggests that many in the security industry are missing out on a crucial source of information that can help better protect enterprises and get inside the mind of a hacker. Let's bust some myths first. We'll talk truth versus hype. But I want to share a personal story first, going back to Southern Michigan, where I grew up as a little girl. When I was little, I used to visit my grandparents' house. The house must have been built back in the 1950s or earlier. And you know what? I have a lot of great memories in that house, but one that really stands out in my memory is exploring the basement. And you know what? We don't even have basements here in Texas. So this was a special part of my childhood growing up north where many of you are. I went snooping around a lot in the basement, and sometimes I would drag my little sister with me. The basement had a set of creaky wooden stairs leading down into it and a single dim light over the stairs. Now, when you peer down into the basement from the top of the stairs, it's black and dingy and smelled really musty. But I figured the family dog lived down there, so how could it be that bad? You know, I was scared. I was probably 4 or 5 years old when I was doing this, but I was also curious. So I proceeded to explore and see what kind of cool family heirlooms I could find. Much to my surprise, when we did make it down there and turned on a light, we found that it wasn't near as scary or dark as we thought. Were there bugs and dirt and dust? Yes, but there were also treasures to be found. The dark web is kind of like the basement of the internet. Not everything down there is dark and dirty, but it is an area of the internet that you don't see on a regular basis, and the mystery can create some pretty real fears and curiosities. The criminal underground is just like that. Once you shine a light into the darkness and start poking around, the mystique dissipates, and you'll find some pretty amazing treasures. Now, that's not to say that illegal goods and services are not sold in the criminal underground, though. You can absolutely find illegal guns and drugs on the dark web, and you can even find a decommissioned Soviet submarine if that's something on your bucket list. Maybe dark web Black Friday or something. And these things do exist in the dark web, but we as information security professionals are looking at a completely different set of threats. Additionally, there are countless forums, mirror pages, and harmless message boards on the dark web. Did you know that people from all over the world access the underground internet to circumvent censorship of information, to explore social media that their country has banned, and to make friends across the world? Anonymity and encryption is a very useful thing for many suppressed peoples. So my point is, not everyone on a .onion site or a deep web forum is criminal. As a matter of fact, even farmers turn to the dark web. One report by Motherboard or Vice revealed that farmers are using firmware downloaded from the dark web to hack their tractors. Unfortunately, many manufacturers have made it nearly impossible to perform unauthorized repair on farm equipment, which farmers feel threaten their livelihoods. So everyone's getting in on the dark web. It's just not as exclusive as it used to be. Now, most organizations, CTI teams, cyber threat intelligence teams, are looking in two places. First, they're looking internally at logs and attacks, And then they're also looking outside, maybe at public news and open sources, at what is happening to everyone else. Now, what they're not looking at is the criminal underground that lies between these two spaces. Deep web and dark web, the criminal underground, as we call all of it, holds all kinds of secrets and treasures on how threat actors are targeting your organizations. This is the space where they operate and do their business. So you need to know as soon as someone is selling access to your servers, you need to know if your employee credentials are being sold on, let's say, Genesis Store, or if you're a bank or retail company, you definitely want to know if your customers' credit cards are being sold on a carding market. And how about your developers? I can't tell you how many times I have found contract developers exposing sensitive and proprietary code on public GitHub repositories and paste bins. So let's talk about this underground space. What is the dark web? Where is it? And what is there? This iceberg graphic is definitely overused, but it seems to be a visual representation that most people are familiar with. So we'll just go with that. At Recorded Future, we like to group in the top majority that you see there called surface web and deep web. Now, we call that the open web or clear web. And the reason for that is because you can access it using a normal internet browser. Like, let's say you use Google Chrome or Safari or Firefox or, Edge, whatever your preferred portal is to get to the regular internet. That's what we call the open web. Now, that consists of, as you know, results that you can find with a search engine, blogs, news media that are not behind a paywall, open sources that are exposed to the public. And then oftentimes there are some websites that are a little harder to find. Maybe you have to log into them, like your bank website, your Gmail account. Maybe you are a member of an organization, you have to log in to access their websites and their information. That all of that is like the, let's say, hidden part of the open web. If you know the URL to visit to, or you have a link, it's easy to access it. But if you don't know how to find it, or it doesn't pop up on a search engine, it's a little bit more hidden. Now, all of that is accessible through your normal web browsers. And we call all of that information that's valuable to you, it's called OSINT, or open source intelligence. But today we're going to talk about the more hidden dark web part of the internet. And the dark web is accessible through a browser called Tor, T-O-R. And the Tor browser, it's actually an acronym, stands for the Onion Router. Now, these websites can include anything from a .onion mirror of a social media platform like Facebook to really shady exclusive forums where goods and services are traded for cryptocurrency. And the dark web, which is, like I said, all the websites end in .onion, can be accessed through certain Onion browsers. And Tor is not the only one. There are other browsers that use the same type of encryption technology and process. Like, for instance, you can download a dark web browser on your phone, and it may go under a different name than Tor. So we've seen the damage over the years that retail and hospitality breaches have had over the past decade. And the tragedy is, in many cases, those threat actors were bragging about those exploits in the dark web long before it was exposed in public. So by going to these sites and monitoring the criminals, we can get ahead of the threat proactively. Welcome to the dark side. I love this meme. I'm sorry to say I didn't ship out cookies to you guys, but if we were in person, I would bring cookies. Today, I'm going to show you some interesting slides, some screenshots from the dark web, rather than showing you live websites from my browser tab. Now, due to the inherent risks to exposing a live audience to illicit material, which we often see, this is what I think is a better option for us today. But all of these are actual screenshots from dark websites. And I'll show you today some of the top CTI use cases for dark web intelligence, and then I'll show you some of the top forums and marketplaces for each use case. Now, before we get started on the dark web screenshots, I must give a little disclaimer first. In no way am I or Recorded Future or CSA encouraging you to access the dark web on your own using company equipment, devices, or networks. If you and your team are considering investigating the criminal underground, I highly recommend you consult with your management and legal teams before doing so. And additionally, I do have a part 2 presentation on how to best access the dark web safely, how to set up false personas for doing this type of business, and also just how to do business with criminals, so that if you do need to buy your own servers, credentials, or anything off of a criminal marketplace, you can be prepared for that. In the meantime, I always recommend you leave it to the experts to do this type of research, and I'll explain a little bit more about that why later. So let's get into the use cases. Now, the first use case is really the most common you're going to find. We know that credentials can be used for unauthorized access to corporate resources, and humans tend to be the weak link in information security. So what if you can go to the dark web and find those credentials before a criminal threat actor can buy them and use them against you? Credentials are the most common asset sold on these forums, and they want identities and access for a variety of reasons. Let's say money, information, privileged access to valuable databases, and so many more reasons. Sometimes, the forums look pretty simple, like what you see on the screen. Plain text, no ads, no gimmicks. And other times it looks a lot like eBay or Amazon. So you'll be surprised when you actually see the screenshots. They're not all that scary looking. It just looks like a regular marketplace, but the content they're selling is stolen. And these are not all elusive markets. If you were to Google credential dumps or credit card dumps right now, you would get results for several dump sites and markets that sell credentials and dumps of valuable information, even on the open web. And oftentimes you can find credential dumps for free on paste sites or leak sites. However, most criminals are out to make a buck, and they will sell these in various dark web marketplaces and forums. Now, before we go on to the next use case, I want to remind you that if you have a question during the presentation, please post it in the chat for the question section, and I'll get to those right after the presentation. And along the way, I will address some of the frequently asked questions. Like at this point, many people ask me, why would criminals give away credential dumps for free? Well, one of the reasons is that when you're first starting out in this criminal underground business, you have to build a reputation for yourself. And one way to do that is by posting your hacks and things that you succeeded in for free under that name, so that people become familiar with your work. And as you build up that expertise and prove yourself, then you can start selling them and getting good reviews from your buyers. So that's one of the reasons. Now, there are tons of marketplaces that sell credential and credit card dumps. Most of them look something like this one. You can see where the dump originated, a description of the dump, the quantity of cards or credentials in it, and the date it was exfiltrated. And you know what? You can even check the live real-time availability of that dump on the marketplace. In my opinion, that's a lot better than, eBay, where you have to bid on something and then wait for the seller to get back to you to tell you if it's available. So then if you want to buy a credit card dump or a credential dump, you just click buy to add it to your cart. You pay with cryptocurrency. Usually it's Bitcoin, Litecoin, or Monero. And then you have your product delivered to you either live on the screen or an email, or sometimes the seller will contact you through their preferred messenger platform. Now this is a screenshot of Genesis Market or Genesis Store, one of the most popular markets for compromised credentials. It's a fully automated marketplace where threat actors upload credentials for sale from compromised bot machines. So from the technical standpoint, malware infects, let's say, a laptop, then it steals all of the credentials out of the internet browsers like Chrome or Firefox, and then sends all of this data back to the C2 and uploads it to Genesis Market. It's a very automated process, and unfortunately, it's very easy. In this view, you can actually search at the top for credentials specific to the resources you want access to. For example, if a threat actor wanted to find employee credentials for a target company, let's say your company, or login credentials for a third-party software company, in this view, all you'd have to do is go search for that URL, and it brings up a very long list of compromised bots that have credentials for that resource. You can also see a list of bots for sale, each holding a host of credentials belonging to the owner of that machine. And at the top, you can search for those specific resources, price, or even location of the victim. So if I want access to Amazon from a US machine and a US user, because maybe I'm going to use a stolen US credit card, then I would be able to narrow down exactly what I'm searching for. So let's say you click on one of these links on the left, and by the way, that blue underlined link is just the name of that particular bot. It's an automated assigned name by the store. You click on the bot to purchase, and it will open to look like this. At the top, you'll see the random string of characters, which is the bot name. Under that, you can see the country of origin, the number of resources, which is usually cookies or credentials. You could see how many browsers they used, the date the credentials were harvested. You can even see the operating system and the price in US dollars. And at the bottom, you can see that it lists Chrome as the browser with 226 cookies. Now, I do want to point out that when we're looking for compromised credentials for our clients, like we as in Recorded Future, we'll go in and actually look for specific professional level operating systems like Windows 10 Pro. Those tend to be more valuable and tend to more likely be employee or company-owned machines, which can be very valuable, especially if you find Active Directory credentials in that bot. Now, this is what you see when you click on a bot that you're interested in, and you could see a little bit more detail about what you'll get for your money. Here you can see the specific subdomains, which helps to target specific websites. And when making this purchase, they will receive all of the usernames, passwords, the URL to log into, and the cookie information, which honestly can be used to analyze victim behavior. A lot of information can be gained from this particular bot. You can determine the victim's location, hobbies, family members, pet names, kid names, you name it. Once you see the list of credentials, I think you would not be surprised at how often people use those types of phrases in their password. And basically criminals can build a full profile on their victim, and then they can further compromise them using that. Let's say phishing, spear phishing, etc. Now, the value here is by finding and alerting on your employee or customer credentials as soon as they show up in this market, you have the option to purchase it off of the market and out of the threat actor's hands as fast as possible. Now, with Genesis Market, you do have to be fast. If it's valuable, if there's Active Directory credentials or it's a professional OS, it will probably fly off the market pretty fast. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of clients that have, dragged their feet making a decision on, do we want to buy this or not? And by the time we go to purchase it, it's already gone. Now, before I move on, I want to address a frequently asked question about doing business on the dark web. You're probably thinking, Charity, won't the hackers resell this credential or these credentials to multiple customers? How can you guarantee that they didn't sell it to someone else or still sell it to you and somebody else? The answer is, I don't know. There are no guarantees when doing business with criminals. However, it is important to consider that criminals run enterprises worth millions of dollars, and they have reputations to protect among customers, and they must provide excellent products and services to compete in the underground market. They wouldn't have a very good reputation if they resell the same credentials or credit card info to multiple parties, if that makes sense. So oftentimes the really renowned ones, the high reputation hackers and sellers, they know that they cannot sell the same credentials to multiple customers. Moving on to use case number 2, bank cards and gift cards for sale. Now, this is one of the most common dark web CTI use cases for banks and retailers. Carding, or the use of stolen bank and gift cards, is one of the most common types of fraud found in the dark web. Much like credentials, sale posts are pretty specific about what you'll get. You get a credit card number, a CVV, first and last name, a valid date, like expiration date, an address, and a bank name. Now, this post from a website called dumps.to even specifies that the cards are checked for validation. In these particular examples, they are dumps from both US and Canada. And when we purchase these off of the market or gather a sample of cards, we can often identify exactly who it belongs to. Then you can block any activity and issue a new card, potentially saving the company thousands of dollars from fraudulent purchases on that card. And as you can imagine, oftentimes we see Amex black cards, unlimited credit limits. Threat actors really do take advantage of these cards, and they pay top dollar for them too. There are a ton of carding markets. Now, Joker Stash is a prominent, was a prominent carding market that sold bank cards, dumps, credentials, and so much more. The Joker Stash, whose URL was jstash.bazaar, claimed to be the biggest darknet marketplace. However, they recently, I should say February, was not that recent, announced they were shutting down their operations. And I believe Monday, February 15th was allegedly their last day. I haven't checked recently to see if their site is still down, but I think it was down. Now, Joker Stash and others like it are notorious for selling credit cards and what is called fulls, F-U-L-L-Z, which means full profiles on victims. A full profile would be all of the PII for that person, as well as their, card data, credit card data, bank information. It's basically everything the criminal needs to conduct fraud and identity theft on that victim. Now, I like to go in and search by BIN. If you work for a financial institution or a bank, you know that a BIN stands for Bank Identification Number. And for those of you who don't work in banking and finance, the BIN is the first 4 to 6 digits of the card number and identifies which bank issues that card. On Joker Stash and other markets like it, they've made it very easy for threat actors to go in and shop for stolen credit cards, and you can actually search by BIN. So if they're targeting a specific bank, they'll go in, search that bank's BIN, and then see all the results, and they can buy cards from that particular bank. Now, for us as CTI analysts, this is especially useful if we're searching for one of our customers' BIN in the marketplace or let's say you work for a bank, you're going to be searching for your own. You go in, you search for your bank BIN number, and it populates search results based on all the credit cards being sold in that marketplace from that particular institution. Now, this is a view inside the list of cards available. It's as easy as find what you want, add to cart, and purchase with crypto. It's a lot like ClearWeb retailers. And like I said earlier, it's pretty much fully automated. But if you do find that you have a problem or a question, most of these forums and marketplaces have 24/7 customer service. They have help desk support. They even have HR programs. They really run like criminal enterprises. Now on to use case number 3. Another thing that criminals are often buying on the dark web is personally identifying information, or PII, also PHI, and other sensitive data. Now, this website is a deep website called ssndob.cc. You can access it from any normal browser if you know which URL to browse to. And just a reminder, I'm giving you guys the URLs, but be cautious not to visit these sites and forums on your personal devices or on company devices if you don't have permission. And also use a VPN anytime you're navigating to these types of sites, because you don't want the criminals to be able to track who you are, where you're logging in from. So you can access it if you know what URL to browse to. Now, just by paying $5 or $6, you can purchase someone's social security number. And this website and about 4 or 5 others like it specifically sell combinations of US persons' social security numbers and dates of birth. So if you know your target's name and their approximate age, you can search for them in this database and buy it for a whopping $5. Sorry to say that no matter how rich you are and no matter how great your credit score is, your social security number is still for sale for just $6. The example on the screen is actually my dad. I found him on here a few months ago, and I bought his information off of the market on his behalf with his permission, of course. And he has a credit score above 800, and his social was $6.20. Needless to say, he was really offended. He was like, "What? I'm worth way more than that." Yep. Now, many companies find this valuable because their VIP info is on this market and is of great risk being there. You can buy it off the market and get it out of the hands of threat actors. And our experience is that once it's purchased off this market, it's usually not repopulated. The caveat to this is that if you buy your social off the market and then your social security number is breached again through a separate, different breach, it could pop up again in the future on these markets. But it's usually pretty rare, and not everyone's socials are on these markets. I've searched for myself, I've searched for many CEOs and CISOs that have tasked us to do so, and many of them have not had their socials breached, which is a great thing. But too often the case is that usually we can find people's information on here. Another way we find PII is through dumps, and some are posted for free on pay sites and others are sold through marketplaces and forums. This particular screenshot is a USA consumer shop database. So let's imagine maybe a retail company, like your favorite retail store, and they have a rewards program or they have your information stored in their database. And this is the type of database that we're looking at here. It's retrieved via access to the site's back end. And the hacker reported that the site is still not secure and they are adding more lines of data as it comes in. Now, this type of live real-time PII is very valuable as it helps criminals build full profiles on their victims. In this post, their info includes names, gender, date of birth, phone, email, and street address. And as of the date of this post, it was 2.2 million lines and growing. And you can buy this huge database for just $350 in Bitcoin, US dollars. Now on to use case number 4. This is a screenshot from Wright forums, which is a really common forum that we monitor for dark web activity. In particular, this is a sale post for AWS root keys for access to over 10,000 companies. One of the most critical use cases for CTI in the dark web is finding access to your servers for sale. By analyzing the description of the victim company in these posts, you can usually narrow down who the actor is targeting. In this particular post, the seller, like I mentioned, is selling AWS root keys. They're offering proof of access, but also they demand simple proof from the buyer to verify things. That might look like a deposit or maybe a hold on an account. And now this seller also specifies that these keys are best used for ransom groups. So essentially, you should have a team of linguists and criminal underground specialists making these purchases and bids for you, able to fluently discuss the purchase, be familiar with dark web business, and know how to not spook the seller. These criminals are smart. They know that researchers and law enforcement are in these forums, and they're always very cautious and skeptical about these types of purchases and who to sell to. The next use case, unfortunately, has been a huge epidemic around the world over the past several years: ransomware as a service. Ransomware as a service is booming business in the underground. And although there are many variants of ransomware as a service, many are very underwhelming, to be honest, and often not successful. There are several families of ransomware that have made really big money over the past few years. Unfortunately, I'm sure some of you have direct experience with ransomware attacks and mitigating these. It is not fun. So the goal here is to get ahead of the threat, find those threats and who they're targeting in advance. Now, this timeline on the screen is actually a view within the Recorded Future platform, where we automatically scrape these dark web forums for mentions of ransomware. We track ransomware actors, and we can actually track the development of a ransomware variant over time and involving several different actors, which is even more relevant these days when law enforcement is putting the pressure on these groups and they go underground, and instead they start working through their affiliates to continue making money. This type of monitoring is very valuable because it allows us researchers visibility into how ransomware is changing and how new variants will behave, thereby enabling faster defense and decryption. Next use case is disinformation as a service, or as it's also called, influence operations. In September of 2019, Recorded Future's Insect Group published a report about disinformation as a service offered in the criminal underground all over the world. And in this report, our team went undercover to hire 2 different disinformation companies for 2 competing purposes. One was to fuel negative sentiment about a target company, which we called the Tyrell Corporation. And the other was to spark positive sentiment about the target company, also called Tyrell Corporation. And the results were interesting. Both companies boasted connections to specialists like journalists and media, translators, and hackers. And their prices varied depending on the service, whether you want a newspaper report, a magazine feature, or advertisements across various sites. Some services were as cheap as $15 and others were thousands of dollars. One thing was for sure: you can change the narrative about a lot of things if you're willing to pay for it. Now, this makes things very difficult for businesses that are trying to counter this harmful type of rumors, lies, and misleading information. And there are use cases like Tesla, where disinformation was deliberately spread about a company or about a problem with a product or a car, and it ended up actually having a huge negative effect on the market and on that company. Now, by observing and monitoring these threat actors and actually engaging with them, you can monitor how they work and then counter it as fast as possible. And last but not least, a growing trend we're observing is the prevalence of insider threats selling information and services on the dark web. We're talking about employees and executives at major companies around the world selling insider information and services. Now, you think you can trust your coworkers, and we want to, but it's so important to trust but verify. And you have to know that you can trust your insiders, especially the ones that have access to the most valuable information. Unfortunately, we do find a lot of insider activity in the dark web. This is one example of an underground criminal that specifically seeks insiders. This threat actor goes by the name of iBankman, and this is a forum called Dark Money. He is seeking Russian bankers to help steal bank cards. He claims to be able to circumvent 115 federal laws in Russia and offers 10 times more money for those partners. So he is really insistent at finding a solid Russian bank insider to feed him bank info to then sell illegally in the dark web. And this is not exclusive to Russia, by the way. We see this type of activity in multiple languages in other forums as well. And many times when you want to inquire, you contact the person through their preferred messenger platforms such as Telegram, Discord, Jabber, and ICQ. Yes, people still use ICQ. It's an old one, but it's still very commonly used in certain regions of the world. Now, that brief tour of top dark web use cases for CTI is just a small sample of the type of information that can be mined from the criminal underground to inform defense in your organization. This is a more exhaustive list of security intelligence use cases for dark web intel. Some of the most common that our customers use are external threat takedowns, purchase of company credentials, samples of bank cards, server accesses, and more. People ask me, can you manually do this work? Can we do it with just a team, like I mentioned earlier, teams of analysts and linguists? Can you manually monitor, detect, and analyze these types of threats? Yeah, sure, of course you can. However, it will require legal clearance from your internal stakeholders. It will require hiring a team of experienced criminal underground professionals and linguists, and quite a lot of time to build trusted personas in these forums and marketplaces to be able to negotiate with the criminals. Now, speaking from experience, this is the hard way to do it. And I have had to do it when I worked for companies that had limited budgets for this type of intel. And it's usually an uphill battle to get permission for this type of CTI. And some CTI teams just don't have the experience or language capabilities needed to do this. And when they do get access to the forums, it can take years to build up the personas needed to do business with the big names. Instead, I recommend you use an experienced vendor to do this. And I've been on both sides, remember. I worked on the enterprise side, I worked for small startups, and I've also worked here on the vendor side. And this is what we call the security intelligence graph, and explains why I make this recommendation. On the left is the collection apparatus, bringing in millions of data points from both open and closed sources, including dark web forums. We've automated the data collection in many of these sources, which really reduces your time to detect the threats when this data has to be ingested and analyzed through both native, natural language processing and structured data analytics. From there, The analytics will be assigned scores, and the analyst team performs a little bit of manual curation, linguistic analysis, and other important actions, really to just reduce the false positives. Then it's delivered to your team in a nice, easy to understand alert that enables you to understand who, what, and how it's a threat to your organization. And even more, if there's action to take on it, such as a takedown or a purchase, the researchers usually are available to assist with that. And all of this helps to reduce your mean time to remediate, which means better metrics for you and for your time. Especially if you're presenting to the CEO, the CISO, the CIO, or the board, they want to know that you're mitigating and remediating risks immediately as soon as you're detecting them. And in order to do that, don't we need to look in these underground sources where the hackers are staging their attacks? This will help you get ahead of the threat and not be as reactive. We're working to be proactive. This is why open and closed source intelligence is so important to protecting your organization. If your SOC did not detect a threat, it's imperative that your CTI team is finding server accesses for sale, compromised credentials, or staging of attacks happening in the criminal underground. This gives you a huge advantage to stop the attack before it starts. Now, as we wrap up the presentation, I'm almost done. I encourage you to take some screenshots of the next couple of slides. These are things that you can take back to your team and actually do some conversating around. Let's talk about how this affects you and your job. If you're working in a CISO or a CIO position, and you have any kind of influence in the security of your organization, I want you to take a look at this slide. Maybe take a screenshot or jot down some ideas here. If your organization is not covering underground sources, I recommend that you pick out your top 3 that you think are most significant in your organization. Because honestly, every industry and company is different. Everyone will be focused on different intelligence requirements or priorities. This is how you're going to set up your strategy for using open sources like the dark web. And wrapping up here, this one is great to take a screenshot of as well. This is something you can brainstorm together on. How do we embed external threat intelligence into our security program? And what immediate challenges do we need to solve? Many companies come to us and don't even know what assets of theirs are exposed in both open and closed sources. So we want to take a look at your exposures, identify them, and remediate them. Now, a lot of people feel overwhelmed when they see all of the use cases for security intelligence. And if you're just getting started or you're maturing your CTI function, like I said, narrow it down to your top 3 priorities and just focus on those. Write them down and identify what your intelligence gaps are. And then if you don't have visibility into the dark web, let us know so we can help you with that. It's important to keep up with your priorities and then shift your focus onto new risks as you master some of these and start filling those intelligence gaps. And last but not least, I'll wrap up with a few solid recommendations. 1, neutralize the threats on their territory. Mitigate the risk pre-exploit. Number 2, incorporate cybercrime intelligence into your Fusion program for a more holistic view of threats. And 3, determine which use cases or intelligence priorities are most needed for your organization. Start with a few and then reevaluate every 6 months. I want to thank you sincerely for your time and for sharing your day with me. I hope this was fun for you and insightful. I welcome your questions and I hope to connect with you either through LinkedIn or Twitter. And before I take questions, I'd like you to know that there is a part 2 if you're interested. Please let us know, where I can teach you how to access the dark web safely, how to do business with the criminals, paying with cryptocurrency, and safely setting up personas and communicate with threat actors. So keep your eyes peeled for that type of part 2 presentation, and I'll be sharing it from my accounts as well. Back to you. Oh, goodness.
Great, thank you, Charity. I see we have a bunch of questions coming in, so I'll try to pass them your way, Charity, and any that you see, feel free to take a whack at. Carrie, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about CSA or anything like that, but if you have anything else, we can cover that now as well.
Sorry, I was waiting for my dogs to get
Are you
quiet.
able to hear me now? Are you guys able to hear me now?
Yes, we can, Carrie.
I just, Charity, excellent. Thank you so much. Like I said, you have a gift of presenting, and thank you for your time today. And this is an excellent presentation. And let's get on to the questions. But thank you, everyone, for attending again.
Awesome. I am trying to view the question, but I can't seem to open it up all the way. Is there any chance somebody could read it to me?
Sure thing. Sorry about that. GoToWebinar's finicky sometimes. I'll read them as I see them come through. The first one I'm seeing here is it possible to visit the dark web without calling down the NSA or other groups onto you? Does probing in there not raise attention to oneself?
Okay, that's a great question. And you'll have to pardon my dogs in the background. Somebody rang my doorbell. So yeah, you know what? Accessing the dark web is actually legal in the United States. And by doing so, you're not necessarily doing anything wrong. So you know, on your personal time, on your personal network and devices, like have full legal right to do so. And hopefully the NSA wouldn't be doing that because they don't monitor US persons. The FBI does. But I've never had an issue with the FBI, and I've been doing dark web investigation on my personal time and professional time for several years. So I would say that in my part 2, one of my recommendations is really how to safely anonymize yourself, including creating alternate personas. So you are completely, you're presenting yourself as someone completely different than you. And that really helps with this type of stuff. It helps people feel comfortable too, knowing that they can interact with criminals without the risk of exposing themselves or their families.
Great. All right, I've got a couple others here. One attendee asked, is there a company that offers social security number buying service for individuals that you know of?
I'm not sure, like for personal use, like if you want to go buy your social off the marketplaces, I'm not familiar, but I bet you could find a private investigator that would be willing to do that. Now, I'm not a PI and I don't do that type of work on the side, but if you want me to kind of coach you through it and how to do it safely, I'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one. If you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, I can walk you through how to do that in a safe way from your personal device.
Great. All right, another one that just came in. What VMs do you recommend for accessing the dark web or setting up alternative accounts?
Good question. And that is one of the things I recommend when safely accessing the dark web is oftentimes these underground forums are accessible through Chrome or Firefox or your favorite normal web browser. In those cases, you definitely want to use a VM or a VPN to anonymize your activity. Now, I'm not sure if I can make brand recommendations. So I would say there are several virtual machine builds that are set up just for this type of activity. And one of them is called Tails. Tails is an operating system that you can boot from a USB, and you can find that if you Google Tails, I'm not sure if it's tails.org, and I do have that website on my other presentation, but Tails has Tor browser built in, and it also will help anonymize your web activity while you're browsing to those, underground forums.
Great. All right. There's another question here that's asking, do you have any insight into what happened to our evil, except for what is portrayed in, the higher level mainstream media?
You know what? We don't have any secret insight. As many of you may have seen, one of our researchers, Dimitri, he actually did an interview with Unknown, who is the leader of the Rebel ransomware group. And you can find that interview, which was really insightful, on the website for The Record, which is the media, our sister media company. So if you search Dimitri, Revel Unknown interview, you could probably find that there. And, our guess is as good as anyone's. We're guessing, the law enforcement pressure was on them. They've kind of taken their money and ran, but they are still probably operating through affiliates, which is something that they're known to do. But yeah, everything that we know about it, I believe we've put in interviews in the public media. And then of course, any new intel is provided to our clients in the Recorded Future platform.
Great. All right. Well, that's looks like all of the broader questions we have. A couple of others around the recording, and we'll obviously be sending that out to everybody. But thank you so much, Charity. Thank you so much, Curtis. Thank you so much to the Cloud Security Alliance for helping us with this today. And thank you to everyone on the line for attending. We'll follow up with the recording and a few other things within about a day or two. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.